It was early spring when I, Jennifer Patterson, a 27-year-old teacher, finally moved into what I hoped would be my sanctuary, a modest, cozy house nestled in a small town in Indiana. After years of living in bustling cities and enduring the constant noise and stress, I craved peace and a fresh start. The house was quaint, with faded white siding and a big front porch that creaked underfoot. It sat on a quiet street lined with towering oaks, their branches just beginning to bud after winter's thaw. I felt a surge of hope as I stepped over the threshold, envisioning a new chapter in my life filled with calm mornings and quiet evenings. The first few days were filled with the usual unpacking and organizing, but I quickly began to notice strange little things happening around the house. At first, it was subtle, lights flickering for a second, a chilled breeze brushing past me even though every window and door was shut tight. I chalked these oddities up to the quirks of an older home, perhaps faulty wiring or drafts seeping through the aging walls. Still, the feeling of unease settled deep in my chest whenever I walked through certain rooms, especially the living room where the air seemed inexplicably heavy. One afternoon, about a week after moving in, I attended a small neighborhood gathering hosted by my next-door neighbors. I was eager to make a good impression and to start building friendships in this new place. The street was lively with laughter and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air. As I chatted with a few people, an elderly woman named Mrs. Callahan approached me quietly, her eyes sharp beneath her silver curls. "I just want to warn you, dear," she said, lowering her voice almost to a whisper. "That house you're in, it's got a dark history. People who lived there before you, well, they didn't stay long. Strange things happen there, things that can't be explained." I forced a polite smile and nodded, brushing off her words as the kind of superstitious gossip that often circulates in small towns. "Oh, I'm sure it's just stories," I replied. "It's probably nothing." Mrs. Callahan's gaze lingered on me a moment longer before she turned away, leaving an uncomfortable knot in my stomach. Curiosity got the better of me that same evening when I visited the town library to learn more about my new home. I sat at a wooden table under a soft lamp, poring over old newspaper clippings and property records. That's when I discovered the house had once belonged to a man named Thomas Granger, a local farmer who mysteriously disappeared decades ago. His vanishing had been a topic of whispered conversation, but no one seemed to know what truly happened to him. The discovery unsettled me more than I expected. It was as if the house was holding on to its past, refusing to let go. Around that time, the odd occurrences began to escalate. The flickering lights became more frequent, sometimes plunging the entire room into darkness for a few seconds. I'd catch sight of fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. At night, I'd hear faint creaks and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The silence of the house was broken by these unexplainable noises, making me feel less like a new homeowner and more like an intruder. One night, I woke suddenly in the middle of the night to the sensation of being watched. The bedroom was pitch black, but I could feel a presence lingering in the corner near the window. My heart pounded against my ribs as I strained to see through the darkness. Seconds passed like hours until, with a gasp, I flicked on the light. Nothing was there, but the oppressive feeling didn't lift. I lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Despite my unease, I tried to keep life normal. I threw myself into my teaching work and took comfort in the routine of lesson plans and grading papers. Yet, the house seemed determined to remind me it had a history I couldn't ignore. The cold spots were no longer confined to random places. Now, entire rooms felt icy, especially the kitchen and the hallway. One afternoon, while making tea, I felt a sudden chill that caused my hands to tremble. The kettle boiled over without me touching it, and the lights flickered violently. I stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh nervously or run out the door. I confided in a few co-workers about the strange happenings, half expecting them to dismiss me as overly imaginative. Instead, one of them mentioned something that sent a shiver down my spine. She told me that the previous residents had left suddenly, never giving a clear reason, and that some locals believed the house was cursed. At first, I dismissed it again, but when she added that Thomas Granger's disappearance was linked to the property, I felt the walls closing in. The next day, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I ran into Mrs. Callahan again. This time, she smiled faintly, as if expecting me to come back with questions. "The house doesn't like to be forgotten," she said cryptically. "If you want to stay, you have to be prepared." That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted palpably. The air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. I sat alone in the living room, trying to read a book to distract myself, but the words blurred on the page. Suddenly, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The room was swallowed by darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I heard a soft, almost inaudible whisper. It wasn't a language I recognized, just a string of sounds that seemed to echo from the walls. I scrambled for my phone to use as a flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. As the light passed over the armchair, I could swear I saw the faint outline of a figure sitting there, just beyond the edge of the light. I blinked, and it vanished. My heart raced as the lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a harsh glow. From that night onward, the strange occurrences became part of my daily life. The house seemed alive, watching me, testing me. I was caught in a cycle of fear and disbelief, unable to fully explain what was happening but too afraid to ignore it. I began to wonder if Mrs. Callahan's warning was more than just old-town superstition. If somehow, this house really was haunted by the past it refused to release. Still, I held on to hope that with time, things would settle down. After all, I had moved here to find peace. I just hadn't realized peace might come with a price. The days that followed seemed to drag on under a cloud of unease that settled heavier with each passing hour. The strange occurrences in my house no longer felt like occasional glitches or imagined tricks of the mind. They were becoming a constant, unavoidable presence. Doors began to open by themselves, sometimes slowly creaking, other times slamming shut with a force that made my heart leap into my throat. I remember one evening, standing frozen in the hallway as the front door swung wide open, despite the fact that I had locked every entrance before going to bed. The cold night air swept through the house, chilling me to the bone. My cat, a usually calm and affectionate tabby named Milo, seemed to sense the shift as well. He started acting skittish, often staring intently at empty corners or hissing at spots where I saw nothing. One night, Milo refused to enter the basement, arching his back and growling low in his throat at the bottom step. I had never seen him so frightened, and it only deepened the knot of worry twisting inside me. One particularly terrifying night, I woke suddenly to the sound of faint whispering voices that seemed to call my name from the darkness. The murmurs were so soft I wasn't sure if I was dreaming at first, but then the whispers grew louder, persistent, and unmistakable. My breath caught as a cold pressure pressed against my back while I was halfway down the basement stairs. The sensation was sudden and violent, like an invisible hand shoving me, causing me to stumble and scramble up the stairs in a panic. I remember my heart pounding wildly, sweat beading on my forehead as I locked the basement door behind me and refused to go near it for days. Despite these frightening moments, I tried desperately to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was just stress or exhaustion catching up with me. After all, moving, starting a new job, and living alone in a strange place was enough to make anyone uneasy. I told myself it had to be natural causes, faulty wiring, drafts, creaky old floors, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Recognizing I couldn't face this alone, I asked my good friend Mark to come stay with me temporarily. Mark had always been level-headed and practical, and I hoped his presence would help me feel safer and provide a fresh perspective. The first night he stayed, I was nervous but relieved to have company. I hoped he wouldn't dismiss my experiences outright, but I also worried he might think I was overreacting. To my surprise, Mark witnessed some of the bizarre events firsthand, and his reaction was a mixture of shock and disbelief. One evening, as we sat in the living room talking quietly, a sudden cold breeze swept through the sealed room, chilling us both despite the windows being shut tight. The temperature seemed to drop noticeably, and I saw Mark rub his arms as if trying to warm himself. Then came the strange tapping sounds from the walls, soft at first, but growing louder and more insistent. Mark's eyes widened as he listened, and for the first time, I saw genuine concern in his expression. "I don't know what's going on here, Jen," he said quietly, "but this isn't normal." Having Mark there made the experiences feel more real and less like figments of my imagination. The strange activity didn't lessen but seemed to intensify. Doors continued to creak open and slam shut, sometimes in rapid succession. One night, I even caught the kitchen lights flickering in a pattern, as if someone was trying to communicate through the bulbs. Milo's behavior worsened. He would hiss and dart away from rooms where the atmosphere felt thick and oppressive. One afternoon, while Mark and I were trying to figure out what to do next, I noticed a strange scratch on the wooden dining table. At first, I thought it was accidental, maybe a mark from a utensil or a pet's claw. But as I examined it more closely, it became clear the scratches formed a pattern, almost like letters or symbols. The markings were deep and jagged, as if someone, or something, had deliberately carved into the surface. I showed them to Mark, who looked equally disturbed. "We should document this," he suggested, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "Maybe someone can help us figure out what these mean." The presence in the house was no longer just unsettling. It felt actively hostile. I began to sense an oppressive weight pressing down on me, especially in the evenings. Sleep was elusive. Every night I lay awake, eyes darting around the dark room, imagining shadows shifting just beyond my vision. The exhaustion was starting to take its toll. Mark noticed the changes in me too. He told me I was becoming withdrawn, that I barely ate or spoke when we were alone. He said my eyes had dark circles underneath, and I looked like I hadn't slept in days. It was hard to admit, but he was right. The stress of living with the unknown was wearing me down, and I was beginning to fear I was losing myself. Things took an even stranger turn when my younger sister came to visit for a weekend. She was curious about the house and eager to see the new place, unaware of the unsettling atmosphere. But by the second night, she confided in me that she had seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the rooms, watching her silently. She said she felt cold spots in the hallway and heard faint whispers when she was alone. It was the first time I realized my experiences weren't isolated to just me. Frightened and unsure where to turn, Mark and I decided to seek professional help. We reached out to a local group called the Indiana Spirit Seekers, a team of paranormal investigators who came highly recommended. They arrived with their equipment, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and recording devices, and spent a chilly evening exploring every corner of the house. Their findings were unsettling. The team detected multiple sources of unexplained energy and recorded strange sounds on their audio devices, whispers, knocks, and even low moans. According to them, the house was home to several restless spirits, trapped by unresolved histories. They warned that the energy felt deeply entrenched in the structure, suggesting these entities had been attached to the property for decades, perhaps even longer. The investigators advised us that calming the spirits would not be easy and might require rituals or blessings performed by experienced practitioners. They also cautioned us that the presence could become more aggressive if disturbed. That night, alone in my bedroom, I lay awake pondering their words. The house was no longer just a home. It was a place where the past lingered stubbornly, refusing to let go. I felt caught between two worlds, one I understood and one that defied explanation, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could live in the tension between them. After the paranormal investigators left, Mark and I tried to carry on as normally as possible, but the house's atmosphere had shifted once again. It was no longer just eerie. It felt actively hostile. The uneasy calm we'd hoped for vanished, replaced by a lingering tension that wrapped around us like a suffocating fog. The strange disturbances didn't just continue. They seemed to grow more aggressive and purposeful. One evening, as I was cleaning the living room, I noticed fresh scratches etched into the wooden armrest of the couch. The markings were jagged and chaotic, almost like frantic messages left by unseen hands. I ran my fingers over the grooves, trying to decipher any meaning, but the symbols were indecipherable. It was impossible to ignore the fact that these marks hadn't been there before. I called Mark into the room, and his face paled when he saw them. "This isn't just random damage," he said quietly. "It feels like a warning." The oppressive presence in the house weighed heavily on me. I found myself retreating into silence, reluctant to speak or confront what might be lurking just beyond sight. Sleep became a rare luxury. I'd lie awake for hours, heart pounding, eyes fixed on dark corners where shadows seemed to shift and writhe. Mark noticed the change in me, how I became withdrawn, how exhaustion clawed at my every movement. He told me I looked like I hadn't slept in days, and I knew he was right, though I couldn't stop it. One weekend, my younger sister Emily came to visit, hoping to spend some time with me and see the new house. At first, I tried to keep the unsettling atmosphere under wraps, but it wasn't long before she began to sense the strange energy too. On the second night, she confessed she had seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the rooms, silently watching her. She described feeling cold spots in the hallway and hearing faint whispers when she was alone in the bathroom. I thought it was just my imagination at first, Emily said one morning, her voice trembling slightly. But then I saw one move. It looked like a dark silhouette, just standing there, watching me. Her words sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I wasn't alone in experiencing this anymore, and that realization terrified me. What were these entities? What did they want? And why were they so intent on making their presence known? Desperate for answers and some semblance of peace, Mark and I reached out again to the Indiana Spirit Seekers. This time, they returned not just to investigate, but to attempt cleansing rituals aimed at calming the restless spirits. They explained that the house was saturated with negative energy, the result of multiple unresolved traumas tied to the property's long history. The investigators warned us that the process might provoke stronger reactions from whatever was attached to the house. During the cleansing, strange things happened. The temperature dropped sharply, and the faint sound of whispering voices filled the rooms, growing louder and more urgent. At one point, a heavy book flew off a shelf and hit the floor with a thunderous crash. Mark and I exchanged worried glances but stayed through the entire ritual, hoping it would ease the tension. Though the investigators claimed to have lightened the energy, the oppressive presence didn't vanish. Instead, it seemed to retreat just enough to regroup. The house felt like a battleground where unseen forces struggled for control. Mark began to notice other changes in me beyond the physical exhaustion. My demeanor shifted. I became quieter, more cautious. I'd often stare blankly into space, lost in thought or dread. Sometimes, I caught myself talking to the shadows, as if trying to reason with something intangible. The strain was visible not just to Mark, but to friends and co-workers who noticed my withdrawal from social activities. One afternoon, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I found a tattered journal that had belonged to one of the previous occupants. The faded pages contained cryptic entries filled with fear and despair, detailing unexplained noises, shadowy figures, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Reading those words felt like peering into the soul of the house. It was haunted not just by spirits, but by sorrow and pain that refused to fade. The most disturbing episodes often happened late at night. I'd awaken to the sensation of someone standing at the foot of my bed, their presence heavy and unyielding. On several occasions, I felt cold fingers brush against my skin or heard soft scratching noises just outside my bedroom door. Mark, who stayed with me nearly every night, witnessed some of these moments. Once, he saw a dark silhouette glide silently across the hallway, disappearing before he could react. Despite the growing hostility, Mark and I tried to coexist with the disturbances. We learned to avoid certain rooms at night and kept lights on as much as possible. We talked openly about our fears, which helped to ease the isolation that had crept in. But the strain was undeniable, and it was clear that the house was exacting a toll on both of us. One evening, after a particularly harrowing night, Mark confided his concern. "Jen, I'm really worried about you. You're not yourself anymore. This place, it's wearing you down." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this. It feels like something is trying to break me." Our fears were compounded when we noticed signs that whatever haunted the house seemed to be growing bolder. The cryptic messages appeared more frequently, scratched into furniture and even the walls. Objects moved of their own accord, often in direct response to our presence. The house no longer felt like a home. It was a prison. One night, after Mark had gone home, I heard a loud banging at the front door. Heart racing, I peered through the peephole, but no one was there. The sound repeated, relentless and echoing in the empty night. I locked the door tight and retreated to the safety of my bedroom, but the pounding continued for several minutes before fading into silence. The next day, Mark and I discussed what to do next. We knew we couldn't continue living like this indefinitely. Our lives were unraveling, and the house's grip was tightening. We were caught in a nightmare that we couldn't wake from. In a final attempt to understand and perhaps find peace, we reached back out to the spirit seekers. They suggested that the house's energy was too deeply entrenched to be easily calmed, and that the spirits might never fully leave. The only solution, they hinted, might be to leave the house altogether. But that thought was terrifying in its own right. Leaving meant abandoning the place I had hoped would be my refuge. It meant giving up on the life I was trying to build. Yet, the alternative was living in constant fear and exhaustion, trapped with forces beyond my understanding. As I lay awake that night, listening to the house creak and whisper around me, I realized that whatever the spirits wanted, they had already begun to win. The battle wasn't over, but I was running out of strength to fight. The decision to leave the house didn't come easily. For months, Mark and I had tried everything we could think of, living alongside the disturbances, seeking help from paranormal investigators, even cleansing rituals meant to calm restless spirits. But nothing worked. The oppressive presence remained, growing stronger and more menacing with each passing day. Eventually, it became clear that staying was no longer an option if we wanted to preserve our sanity and well-being. Breaking the news to my parents was difficult. They had always been skeptical about the paranormal, seeing it as superstition or imagination run wild. I worried they wouldn't understand why we were leaving a perfectly good home we had invested so much hope in Indiana. When I told them about the decision, their initial reaction was disbelief. "You're sure it's not just stress?" my mom asked gently, concern etched in her features. "I wish it were that simple," I replied. "But it's not. Something is wrong with the house. We can't stay." Reluctantly, they agreed to come and help with packing and preparations for the move. I hoped that their presence might reassure me, or at least provide some distraction from the tension that had settled over my life. But even their arrival didn't stop the strange occurrences. In fact, my parents soon began experiencing unsettling events themselves. One afternoon, as my dad was sorting boxes in the basement, he called out in surprise. The door just slammed shut behind me. I didn't touch it. My mom later told me she felt cold spots moving through the rooms, and at night, she sensed the unmistakable feeling of being watched. The skepticism that had once kept them grounded began to waver in the face of these inexplicable experiences. They admitted to feeling uneasy, and for the first time, they began to take the paranormal seriously. Packing was a tense, hurried affair. We worked quickly, eager to get out of the house before the activity escalated further. I avoided certain rooms, especially the basement and the hallway, where the cold spots were strongest and the sense of dread most overpowering. Mark stayed by my side, offering quiet support and sharing my determination to leave this place behind. The night before our planned move-out date was one of the worst. The house seemed to awaken, as if sensing our intent to abandon it. Doors slammed repeatedly throughout the night, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. I heard whispering voices, urgent and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. Shadows darted just beyond my field of vision, and at one point, a heavy piece of furniture shifted violently, scraping against the wooden floor. I lay in bed, clutching the blankets tightly, tears streaming down my face as I prayed for the nightmare to end. Mark held my hand, his presence the only comfort in the darkness. Neither of us slept. The next morning, we loaded the last boxes into the car and took one final look around the house. It felt alien now, a place of pain and fear, no longer the home I had dreamed of. As we pulled away, I glanced back to see my parents standing on the porch, faces pale and drawn. I wondered if the house would torment them in my absence, or if the spirits would finally find some peace. Shortly after we moved out, the house was sold to new owners. I haven't spoken to them directly, but I heard from a neighbor that they were unaware of the house's history and the experiences previous residents endured. I hoped they would find safety and comfort where I could not, though a part of me feared the restless spirits might continue to haunt the property. In the weeks following the move, I reflected on how deeply this experience had altered my view of reality. What I had once dismissed as mere superstition became an undeniable part of my life, a world where the unseen could touch the living in ways that defied explanation. My story caught the attention of a local radio program that focused on true hauntings and paranormal encounters. They invited me to share my experience, and though it was difficult to relive the memories, I agreed. Speaking openly about what I'd endured helped me process the trauma and connect with others who had faced similar situations. The radio interview sparked further interest in my story, leading me to attend paranormal conferences and join online forums where I met others fascinated by the supernatural. Despite the fear and pain, I found a strange comfort in knowing I wasn't alone, that the world was larger and more mysterious than I had ever imagined. Mark and I continued to support each other, our bond strengthened by the ordeal we'd endured together. We talked about the future, about finding a place where we could finally feel safe and at peace. Though the shadow of the haunted house still lingered in my mind, I was determined not to let it define me. The experience taught me to listen to the world around me, to my own instincts, and to the stories of those who came before. It opened my eyes to the complexities of the unseen, and while I remain cautious, I've become more curious, eager to explore the mysteries that lie just beyond the surface of everyday life. As I move forward, I hold on to hope that the new occupants of that house will find the peace we could not. And I wonder, sometimes, if places like that are forever touched by restless spirits, or if, given time and understanding, even the darkest shadows can be lifted. Since moving away from that house, the unsettling experiences stopped. The oppressive weight that once hung over me lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. But even though the hauntings ceased, my curiosity about the paranormal only grew stronger. What had happened in that old house? Why did those spirits linger? I found myself drawn to answers, eager to learn more about the unseen forces that had so profoundly affected my life. I started attending paranormal conferences, gatherings where researchers, investigators, and enthusiasts shared stories and theories. These events were a revelation, not just for the knowledge I gained, but for the community I discovered. I met people who had experienced similar hauntings, who understood the fear and confusion that came with living alongside something inexplicable. Their support helped me feel less isolated and gave me a sense of purpose. Beyond the conferences, I became active in online forums dedicated to paranormal phenomena. I shared my story, listened to others, and exchanged ideas about how to approach hauntings with respect and care. It was fascinating to see how many different perspectives there were, from skeptical scientists to spiritual mediums. This blend of viewpoints opened my mind to the complexity of the paranormal world, far beyond the simple, haunted label I had once applied to my old home. My story gained traction among paranormal enthusiasts, and I was invited to collaborate on a documentary exploring haunted locations throughout Indiana. Filming the documentary was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. Revisiting some of the sites, interviewing experts, and recounting my own experience brought back memories I'd long tried to suppress. But it also gave me a chance to reclaim my narrative, to present the story in my own words, without the sensationalism that often accompanies such tales. Working on the documentary deepened my understanding of the paranormal and strengthened my resolve to approach it with caution and respect. I learned that many haunted places hold layers of history, trauma, and unresolved emotion, and that spirits often linger because of unfinished business or attachments. This knowledge helped me make peace with what had happened in my house and with the idea that some energies might never fully leave. I also found that sharing my experience helped others. People reached out to tell me their own stories, seeking advice, or simply hoping to connect with someone who understood. It was a reminder that the paranormal isn't just about fear or darkness. It's about human connection, about the mysteries that bind us across time and space. Though I no longer live in that haunted house, I carry its lessons with me. I have become more attuned to the subtle energies around me and more empathetic toward those who live with the unexplained. My journey has transformed me from a skeptic into someone open to the unknown, someone willing to explore the delicate balance between this world and the next. As I continue to explore the paranormal, I do so with a cautious heart. I know there are forces beyond our understanding, some benign and others less so. But I also know that fear should not dictate how we engage with these mysteries. Instead, curiosity, respect, and a willingness to listen can lead to deeper insights and perhaps even healing. I often think about the house on that quiet street in Indiana. I wonder if the new occupants have found peace or if the spirits still roam its halls. It's a question I may never have answered, but I hold on to hope that places like that can eventually find calm, just as I have found my own. My experience has opened a door into a world I never knew existed, a world filled with shadows and whispers, but also with stories waiting to be told. And as I move forward, I remain committed to sharing those stories, to shedding light on the unseen, and to honoring the mysteries that connect us all.